Thank you so much for your time. You've been in Iran and you studied in Ferdowsi University in Mashhad, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Tell me what attracted you and made you make it such a decision and to do this move, as such a move, and go to Iran.
I'm a Jew, and I spent from the age of 14, which is was basically 1963, 64. I've been fascinating about how we can make peace between Muslims and Jews. I had spent a lot of time in the Sunni world, mastering Arabic and Turkish. I have a PhD in Islamic studies, where I use both. And I had very, very good friends from Iran. This is already in the early 70s. And I realized that the Iranian culture, unlike other Muslim cultures, is very different. And I had an opportunity in 1977 to go and travel in Iran. And I knew Persian grammar because you need that to study Ottoman. And I couldn't really put the language together. And so what I did, I was traveling for about, I don't know, 3 weeks, something like this, all over. And the way I put the language together was combining the let's say, Ottoman Turkish meanings of Arabic verbal nouns. And I was inventing the language. People understood me. For example, a word like khurdan, I didn't know for eat, but I could say ak kardam, man mikhon ak konam. And people laughed at me because it's akl al maut, the feast after someone dies. And but I could communicate. I couldn't say to return, so I said murajaat mikonam. I used, shall we say, Arabic words with their Ottoman Turkish meanings. Why Ottoman Turkish? Because they took them from Persian. And so I combined it. And I can only tell you from my first trip, and then when I went back to study in Mashhad in 1978, I was simply very deeply impressed at how different Iranian and classic Persian culture was from the rest of the Muslim world. And it was almost, and I want to say also from my experience in the Sunni world, Shiism, Iranian style, is almost completely different. It's almost a different religion. In Iran, fascinated me, its history. I mean, Iran, when it was taken over by the Muslim world, was already an empire for 1,100 years. How did they manage when you had people, let's say Arabs, coming out of the desert? And we all know what the Iranian view of Arabs is. Let's say it's not positive. And we took over this amazing empire. And how did Iranians manage? How come they survived? How come Persian culture survived, where the rest of the Middle East to the west of Iran, within 1 century of the beginnings of Islam, basically adopted Arabic? It abandoned Aramaic, which was the lingua franca of the area there, and it basically became culturally Arabicized, but not Iran. I figure Iran, the whole culture and the language and the people intrigued me. I was deeply impressed with their analytical abilities, and so I became a fan of Iran and Iranian culture and Persian. I'm sorry I can't do this interview in Persian. I could when I lived in Mashhad, and that was that. Anyway, when I went to Mashhad, the revolution hadn't happened yet. It was in the, and very quickly, we went to the early and mid stages in 1978. And windows were broken, and all my fellow students were, who had been supporters of the Shah, at least I thought so, all of a sudden were yelling, Marg bar Shah, Javid bar Khomeini. And I didn't understand this. I knew who Khomeini was because I had studied Shiism. And I knew that he was a grand Ayatollah from Iran who had been exiled to Najaf. But And when I asked people who was the Grand Ayatollah of their family, of their extended family, which is traditional Shiism, they all smiled at me and it looked at me and directly in the eyes, which Americans understand is when people are telling the truth, and they looked as if they had no idea who I was talking about. I asked the name. I knew the names of 6 Grand Ayatollahs at the time, and I would bring them up, and they looked at me like I was like they didn't know. And I'm sure I now know they knew. What happened was, as the situation was deteriorating, my fellow students were out in the streets yelling, as I said before in Persian, long live the Shah, excuse me, death to the Shah, long live Khomeini. I was mad. Why was I mad? Because they had lied to me. And in the United States, when you look at someone in the face and you say something, if you're going to lie, you look away, you look to the side, you close, you begin to blink your eyes, you do something. But this didn't happen. So I didn't understand what was happening. After these demonstrations, and I saw them out in the streets, we come back to the dormitories, or I come back alone. I'm furious because I was lied to. This is in America, you don't lie. And what happens? All of a sudden, there's a knock on the door. And about 5 or 6 people come in, and they were the people who were out in the streets rioting against what it appeared now, the Shah. They closed the door, and one of them said to me, Khomeini kiye? Meaning they had no idea who they were for. But what they knew, and I did not understand, is they saw power shifting, that the Shah was either unwilling or unable to do what it was necessary to stay in power, and that Khomeini was already broadcasting, and the Shah could do nothing to stop him. And people saw that he was the future, apparently going to be the future leader, and they were already switching their, let's say, allegiance to him. And that's why they were yelling death to the Shah, whom they saw as weak, and long live Khomeini. Why did they come to me and ask who Khomeini was? Because they remembered that I had mentioned Khomeini's name in these 6 names of Grand Ayatollahs that I said. And that's why they came. They wanted to know who they were yelling to support.
You have been there during pre-revolution time when you first went there. Did you see any sign of showing that this is going to happen, or this was one of those things that happened so rapidly while you were there and witnessing the society?
In 1977, I did not see that anything was happening. When I returned in 1978, the same people that I was talking with, and these were people that they gave me an example. They said that things are going very bad, and they need to get out of the country. Some of them had green cards. That means they could come to the United States. And how did they know? Let me just give you an example. One friend said that there was an announcement that at 8 o'clock in the morning one day, at Bank Omron, they were going to be selling the rights to newly cleared properties on which you could build, you can invest, build a house and sell it. At 8 o'clock, my friend went there. He's waiting in line, and the bank doesn't open. And at 8:15, the bank opens, and they said, "I'm sorry, but there's nothing left." And you had this long line of people who were furious. That is the first sign I understood that something was wrong. And my friend was explaining to me that there are more and more incidents that something is wrong here and it may be dangerous. And at that time, I was on my way to Mashhad. I was in Tehran, and but I didn't see it. I didn't feel it. I'm not Iranian, and I was not trained to know these things from the time I was little. So, but in Mashhad, for the first period of time I was there, I had no idea that anything was wrong. But my fellow students had begun to feel it because they were Iranian and they grew up in Iran. And so they knew what to look for. I did not. I failed.
When you left Iran, assuming it was prior to revolution?
It was way. I left Iran in September of 78, and I escaped to Afghanistan. I spent about 3-4 weeks there, and the Afghans had changed the rules. If you went in one area, and I went on the border, I crossed from Mashhad into about 4.5 hours on the bus. They changed the rules. If you came in, for example, I came in via Herat in Afghanistan, you had to go out another way, and I figured I would be managing. I'd get to Pakistan. I called my mother in the United States, and she would wire me money to get a ticket back to the United States. But the Afghans changed their rules, and you had to leave by the entrance that but where you entered, you had to leave. So I had to go back. This was already, I think, either late September, something. I don't remember exactly, in 1978. And then I spent the next period of time. I must tell you, I was traveling with a friend who is a part German origin, and he looked like his mother. Now in Mashhad, because it was clear, I was dark. I didn't look the way I look today. I was dark, dark skin, jet black hair. But he looked German. And so in Mashhad, we couldn't go back to the university. So we tried to get a hotel, but because he looked like that he was not Muslim, he was therefore najes, and he couldn't. But he knew excellent Arabic, and his Persian was okay. And when he began to recite by heart Quran, then they realized he had to be a Muslim, so we were allowed to stay. But they were afraid that all the other pilgrims who had come to Mashhad in these small hotels, that people would say, they have najes people staying there, then obviously the place is najes. So anyway, there were many adventures we had like this, and it was absolutely fascinating, and we got tremendous insight into the culture of Iran, which I hope someday that when Iran is free, that there is a new regime, and the mullahs go back to their houses, the places of study, their seminaries, and the Iranian people have a chance to have some control of their own destiny. I want to go back because my feelings towards Iran and my experiences are very, very warm. And I'd like to see what happened in all these years.
Many people from the time of revolution, even still to this day, who are either living inside or outside in Iran, are blaming President Carter for the revolution in Iran. Was this also a dominant thinking at the time inside Iran while you were there?
Well, as we know, Iranians have a tendency to blame instead of taking responsibility for Iran. But I want to tell you of what stood out more than anything, that there was this, people were making sort of jokes when they realized Marg bar Shah, Javid bar Khomeini, Marg bar Millet Porfuse Iran. In other words, we brought this on ourselves. But they wouldn't say this in public. In private, they would say this to me. Was there a feeling? There was a feeling because of the story that I told about Bank Omron in Tehran. There was a feeling that something was wrong. You would say that, and what was happening? There's an Ottoman Turkish, which is also used in Persian word mashkuk. Something was wrong. Who knows what it was? Who knows what was doing? In my view, yes, Carter was responsible, and that's out of pure ignorance. He wanted the Iranians to wake up and to think like Americans. And that's not possible. When you grow up where you are part of a particular culture. And the concept of human rights, for example, the way it is understood here in the United States, and to the extreme by leftists here, the woke people, is alien to Iran. And if, for example, the Shah would have done what was which would have been historically done in Iran, which was try to suppress all the demonstrations and all sorts of problems that were going on, then he would have been accused of violating human rights. And his Shah, the Shah's Shah, was Jimmy Carter. Now, I don't think that Carter and the people around him did this maliciously to hurt Iran. But there are times we say and do things in life that we don't realize the consequences. So do I hold Jimmy Carter and Brzezinski around him, the people who are, and some of the I want to say so-called experts on Iran, most of whom didn't know Persian. And by that time I spoke after my time at the university. I think I did, my courses were in Persian. There was no other language. Did I don't think that a lot of the people who dealt with Iran, and from my experiences afterwards, I worked for 28 years at the Pentagon after I came back from Iran and finished my PhD. Then, sometime later, I think in 1982, excuse me, I started to work at the Pentagon and in the office of the Secretary of Defense, and I know that the Iranian government knows all about me. And I worked a lot on Iranian affairs. I want Iran to be ruled by sane people who don't want to destroy everybody around them, who don't think like them, and be an honored member again of the international community, the community of nations. I remember a time period that when Iranians traveled before the revolution, that the Iranian passport was an honored passport. People didn't have to go through what they have to go through today when the country is run by a bunch of terrorists. And the Iranian people couldn't do much to stop this. The only way they can right now is with the new sheriff coming into power, that is President Trump, who doesn't seem to want to take his experience. He doesn't take nonsense. Then, God willing, we will get to a situation that the Iranian people will resume like they were before 1978 or 1979, to be the honored people that they were in the past, that the country was in the past, that this amazing civilization, which is, 2,600 years now, or more, whatever it is, it's huge. Iranian people deserve better, much better. And God willing, we can only hope, because we can't know the future, that as of January 20th, there will be a chance for the Iranian people to regain control of their lives. And these terrorists who run their country will have a different life.
You mentioned President Carter and what they have done, not maliciously, but out of ignorance. Do you think in all these years, from what you follow on Iran, do you think the decision makers in DC have a better understanding of Iran, its people, its dynamics, and its politics?
I can tell you again, when you serve for 28 years, I have not been in government for the last 14 years or so. You get a sense of it. There's no such thing as all the people. What there is, were there people who got Iran and who respected Iran? Absolutely. But America, is being the most powerful and the greatest country on the face of the earth, has other responsibilities to wake up in the morning and say, geez, I wonder what's happening in Iran today. We have other things to do besides Iran. And the result is that, yes, there are some people who had a deep appreciation and ask, and for me, it's a question of, do you ask good questions? From a person, what type of questions he asks, what he understands about a subject. And there are certain people, and I don't want to name names, who asked me wonderful questions about Iran. And they boiled down to, if I could summarize in one sort of question, how can we help the Iranian people free themselves from the tyranny that controls their lives? That's the bottom line question.
There was a time when George W. Bush administration had policies and ideas like regime change in Iran. They were just floating it around. Do you think this is still appealing to U.S. decision making towards Iran?
Certainly not under the Obama rule or Biden rule, because of the same people. But if the question is how do you help the Iranian people free itself, every time the government looked weak in Iran, you saw in the streets of Iran people out in the streets yelling, wonderful things against the regime and for the freedom of Iran. But that was when America or Israel did things which showed the people that the government was weak. I remember reading signs. I don't remember, they went on one that I saw, oh my God, within the last year, something to the effect of Israel, Bizan, strike. And we will go out into the streets. I wish I have pictures of this. We will go out and do the rest. It's not the responsibility of the American government to overthrow the regime. It's the responsibility of America and others that if the Iranian government is interfering into the affairs of other countries, then those other countries can do something about that. And so our job, as far as I'm concerned here in the United States, is to show the people how weak the Iranian government is. And then, just as I witnessed in 1978, how the people understood once they saw the Shah was weak, they went out into the streets and said awful things about him, which they didn't do before. The same thing can be happening in demonstration, and one could help, shall we say, the Iranian regime disappear. But it is the job of the Iranian people, not outsiders, to decide what is going to happen in Iran in the future after, God willing, this regime is gone. And for the first time, and we know that the government of Iran feels very shaky, for the first time, look, just take, for example, what is happening. All these people since the former President Trump and the president-elect now, thank God, of the United States, all around the world, the moment that Trump says something, people quake. They get scared. What do I mean? It's a tremendous compliment. Trump is a leader. And yesterday or the day before, when Trump was talking about increasing tariffs to on Canada because of its border and some of its policies towards the United States, Pierre was the father, Justin Trudeau, who hates, you could see this from videos that he put on the net. Trudeau all of a sudden comes down to Mar-a-Lago, where Trump's house is, and to speak with Trump about please don't impose tariffs. He said so. It's all public. Please don't impose it because you'll that way the Canadian economy, which is so tied to the American economy, the Canadian economy will collapse. What was Trump's response? Well, you could always join America as the 51st state. The answer is people outside, besides Canada and the United States, listen to this. This is being heard in Iran. This is being heard all over. And all of a sudden, the moment that we have a strong leader here who stands up for America and American values and appoints, the people whom he has nominated and God willing will be appointed, these people want to stand up for America, its values, where anybody with half a brain and a bit of initiative can make it very nicely here in the United States. And if any other countries, in this case, we're talking about Iran, if these countries would like to continue their policies of hurting America's allies, let me be polite, and I'm not Persian. But let me say that maybe it'd be a good idea for them to rethink what they're doing. And we know that the regime sees itself, that it's in trouble. The economy is collapsing in spite of these. Supposedly, the Biden administration has kept all these sanctions on, but the fact is they look the other way. And the Biden administration has allowed Iran to sell oil. They say they don't, but I follow the oil situation in Iran very, very closely. And during the last 4 years, the situation, as shall we say, eased, and Iran now has all this money not to rebuild this country because the Iranian government is not rebuilding the country. It's destroying the country. It's using that money to fund terrorists all over the world, and especially throughout the Middle East.
Since you were in Iran before the revolution, I think the Shah in Iran in that time was pursuing some sort of secularism. Do you think this path is still valid to go through, or this would be a tough challenge ahead?
Well, the Western concept of religion as a separate entity is not a Muslim, or in this case, Iranian concept. Religion is a very public thing. If it is going to be discrimination, then Iran will suffer, because its best and its brightest, who didn't share the views of the regime, leave the country. You're here, for example, and look at all there are 2 excellent engineering schools in Iran, and if you have an engineering degree from most Middle Eastern universities, let's say in either the Arab world or in Turkey, you can't, if you happen to come to Europe or the United States, you can't easily get a job. But people who studied in Iran, this is again the greatness of Iran, and who studied engineering and came out, or medicine, they're in Europe and the United States, they have very little problem getting jobs, because the Iranians, they do well, and they left because they couldn't be themselves, and they had better possibilities in the future. And this is the huge brain drain that this administration in Iran has brought upon the country. The best and the brightest do their best to leave. Now, one of the things is, what is enforcing religion? Listen, if women, I remember very well, Mashhad was a religious city, but in other places in Iran, some women had hijab on and some did not. But it was your own preference or your family if they enforced this on you. The regime, let me give you a personal story. I studied with a woman who I was very friendly with, who was one of the few people in classrooms who wore a hijab. And I remember asking her why. And she said, because it makes me feel more comfortable, more secure in the environment where I am. And I believe, look, Imam Ali Reza was the hero of Mashhad. It's the place where he was martyred. What was very strange is about 2 or 3 years later, I lost contact with her, but she had my telephone number, and she made it to the United States, and she calls me, and it was a pleasure to hear from her. She was in Tehran, if you wish, Los Angeles. And I asked her, I said, if you don't mind my asking, what about the hijab? Are you wearing one here? She laughed. She said, the moment that they made me wear the hijab, that it wasn't my own will to wear it, I didn't want to wear it anymore. I'm not wearing it for the government. I'm wearing it for me. I'm only saying is, I don't know what secularism in the Muslim world doesn't mean what secularism is in the West. You can be, the culture of Iran today is this permanent fight between classic Persian culture and the Islam, which, as so many people told me, was forced on us by the Arabs. It's if people want to be religious or not, if you call that secularism, yes. But if the country that the mosque you're going to lose and all that, no, no. If people want to support the houses, the different in Qom or Mashhad, they want to support it. That's their. If the people want to, it's their business. What I guess what I'm advocating for, let the Iranian people decide their future for themselves. This government is trying to force all sorts of people. Look at the business of Sireh right now in Iran. You're having 20-minute marriages. And who gets the money for these documents? This is official, let's say, we would call it prostitution. They would not. These poor women, what it is, and then who gets the money? The mullah who draws up the contract. This isn't right. It is as far as it's not fair to the women, and it's not fair. It's not fair. All I want is that the Iranians have a right to choose what type of life they wish to lead. It's not my business, and I don't. It's Western secularism. If you just impose secularism, that religion, what you can't do whatever. If you say, well, now, you can do what you want in your house, but God forbid you walk outside with a hijab if you want to. No, that's the same type of oppression. I want people in Iran that they and their families make their own decisions for themselves. And that would be, if you call that, if that is a form of secularism, yes, that's all. But people should have the ability to decide for themselves.
It's fascinating to talk to you. I'm sure we could talk for hours, but allow me to ask my last question. You started this interview by saying that you were a Jew in Iran. From what I understand, I was just 7 years old when the revolution happened. The regime fueled hatred through Israel. Do you remember how they managed to do it? Since in my lifetime I've never seen any anti-Semitism inside Iran when I was there, and nothing since I'm outside.
Let me answer you this. In certain instances, the answer is yes, that I did see it. But let me give you an example. A foreign ambassador, and I'm not back in the time of the Shah, from the West, when he would have parties at his house, the driver would have to take the Coke bottles and return them in another place because all these non-Muslims had touched it, and so the bottles became najas. That, yes, I remember stories of friends of mine, Jews from Shiraz, that they went to government schools, and when it had rained, the Jews had to stand at the side of the class and dry off, because if they sat down on a chair, the najas, let's call it najasi if the word exists, najasi, would pass through what? Because it comes through liquids. If they would sit on a chair, then the chair would become contaminated. And there were instances of this, but were Jews basically allowed to look, the love of Jews? Here's your proof. If you went to Iran, if you went to Israel, when you went into a store, which was of an Iranian Jew, there was almost always on the wall a picture of the Shah. No one in Israel was required to put the picture of the Shah up. But I remember that should tell you that when they thought of Iran, it was, there is this Esfahan Nesfa Jehan. I would say Dunya or Iran Nesfa Jehan. These people didn't have negative feelings towards Iran. These are people who grew up in Iran. Jews, I'm talking about Jews, obviously, if they immigrated to Israel from Iran. Today, I can only tell you the following, and I don't want to go into details. The fact that there were, when I lived in Iran, about 80,000 Jews, and today there are less than 5,000, should say something. That do they feel a sense of discrimination? Oh, the Iranian government goes out of their way to let people visit synagogues, and and things like that. Now, I can tell you that friends of mine who are Jews who live in Iran and travel abroad, when they would come out and talk with family members, they would say what the story was. Only on the surface, everything is fine, but below, no, it was not fine. But that's after the Shah. And I would only hope that, again, in the future, God willing, that if there is a new regime in Iran who doesn't base its life, they call it Islam. I call really it's nafret. It's based on. It's not Islam. It's hatred. That in the future, God willing, that a lot of the things that were common under the Shah, where people could be whom they were and what they wanted and do what they wanted, as long as they didn't try to overthrow the regime. That's what I would hope would happen now.
Thank you so much.
I only want to say one last thing in one sentence. My memories of Iran are wonderful. I love Iran.